The sirens started at 9:47 p.m. Not in one city, not in one region, across an entire country, simultaneously. Millions of phones lit up with a single emergency alert. Families grabbed children. Elderly residents moved toward stairwells. Drivers pulled off highways and lay flat on the pavement. Because in Israel, when the sirens scream, you have minutes, sometimes seconds. And last night, those sirens were responding to something the Middle East has feared for decades. Iran, not a proxy, not a militia, not a shadowy network with plausible deniability. But the Islamic Republic of Iran itself launched a direct, large-scale ballistic missile strike against the State of Israel. Roughly 180 to 200 missiles, multiple launch sites, coordinated salvos, and among them, according to emerging intelligence reports, some of the most advanced ballistic weapons in Iran's arsenal. Weapons specifically engineered to defeat the very air defense systems Israel depends on for its survival. The world did not just watch a missile strike last night. The world watched a threshold get crossed that changes the strategic architecture of the entire Middle East. And within hours, before most of the world had even woken up, global oil markets went into freefall. Crude prices surged toward levels not seen in over 18 months, and energy analysts began issuing emergency warnings about a potential global oil shortage with consequences that reach far beyond the region. This is not just a Middle East story. This is your story. And in the next 15 minutes, we are going to tell you everything you need to know. Stay with us. Let's establish the facts precisely, because in a crisis like this, precision matters. At approximately 9:47 p.m. Israeli local time, radar systems operated jointly by the Israeli Defense Forces and United States Central Command detected a massive ballistic missile launch originating from multiple sites inside Iranian territory. The data was processed, confirmed, and shared with Israeli air defense commanders in real time. Within minutes, the National Emergency Alert System activated across Israel. What followed was one of the most complex air defense engagements in modern military history. The IDF confirmed that Iran deployed at least 3 distinct categories of ballistic missiles in the strike package. Medium-range Ahmad and Ghadr missiles, systems Iran has used before, formed the bulk of the salvo, but intelligence assessments flagged something new and deeply alarming in the mix. The Fatah-1, Iran's domestically developed hypersonic glide vehicle, was reportedly deployed in meaningful numbers for the first time in a live combat operation against Israel. The Fatah-1 is not a conventional ballistic missile. It does not follow a predictable parabolic trajectory that air defense computers can calculate and intercept with standard precision. It maneuvers, mid-flight, at speeds exceeding Mach 13. That capability is specifically designed to defeat systems like Israel's Arrow 3 interceptor, the crown jewel of Israel's layered air defense architecture. Israel's defense response was immediate and comprehensive. Iron Dome engaged shorter-range threats. David's Sling targeted medium-altitude ballistic missiles. Arrow 3 was deployed against threats still in exo-atmospheric flight above the atmosphere before terminal descent began. And crucially, United States naval assets operating in the eastern Mediterranean provided additional tracking and engagement support. The interception rate was significant, but it was not complete. Israeli officials confirmed multiple impact sites in the Negev desert region. Damage assessments revealed strikes in the vicinity of Nevatim Air Base, the home of Israel's F-35I Adir stealth fighter fleet and a central node in Israeli Air Force long-range strike planning infrastructure. Emergency services were deployed. Casualties were reported. Iran's state media broadcast the operation under the name Operation True Promise 2, a deliberate callback to its April 2024 strike, and framed it as a proportional act of self-defense under international law, citing Israeli military operations against Iranian personnel in Syria and Lebanon as justification. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated publicly that the operation was concluded. implying that Tehran did not seek further escalation if Israel chose restraint. Israel's prime minister convened the war cabinet within the hour. His message to the nation was brief and unambiguous. There will be a response. It will be severe, and it will be on Israel's terms and timeline. To understand last night, you need to understand the last 45 years. Iran's Islamic Republic was founded in 1979 on an ideology that included, at its core, the explicit rejection of Israel's legitimacy as a state. But for 4 decades, Iran pursued that hostility indirectly. It built Hezbollah in Lebanon. It armed Hamas in Gaza. It funded the Houthis in Yemen and Shia militias across Iraq and Syria. It constructed what military analysts call the axis of resistance, a ring of proxy forces positioned to threaten Israel from multiple directions, while Tehran maintained the shield of plausible deniability. That strategy worked until October 7, 2023, when Hamas launched the deadliest attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. Israel's response was not simply military retaliation. It was a systematic campaign to dismantle the entire proxy architecture Iran had spent decades constructing. The results were devastating for Tehran's strategic network. Hamas's military infrastructure was progressively degraded across Gaza. Hezbollah's senior command was eliminated in a series of operations of staggering intelligence precision, including an operation that simultaneously detonated thousands of communication devices carried by Hezbollah operatives across Lebanon. Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's Secretary General and arguably Iran's most valuable regional asset, was killed in a targeted Israeli airstrike in Beirut's southern suburbs. Iranian Revolutionary Guard generals were eliminated in Syria. Iran's carefully constructed buffer, the network of proxies designed to ensure Tehran never had to fight Israel directly, was being systematically removed. Faced with mounting losses and a collapsing deterrence posture, Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and the IRGC High Command made a decision that fundamentally altered the rules of engagement in the Middle East. They decided to fight directly. Last night was not the first instance of that decision. Iran's April 2024 strike, over 300 drones and missiles, largely intercepted through a remarkable coalition defense, was the opening move. But last night's operation was qualitatively different. More missiles, more advanced systems, more specific targeting, less performance, more destruction. Iran has crossed a threshold, and thresholds once crossed do not uncross themselves. Now let's talk about what this means for the global economy, and for you personally. 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes through a single waterway every single day. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, is the most strategically critical energy choke point on Earth. Approximately 17 million barrels of crude oil transit it daily. Close that strait, even partially, and the global energy market does not adjust gradually. It shatters. Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz in the event of military escalation on multiple occasions. Those threats were previously considered unlikely to be executed because doing so would damage Iran's own economy and provoke a direct American military response. But a nation that has just launched a direct ballistic missile strike on Israel, accepting the international and military consequences of that action, is a nation whose risk calculus has fundamentally shifted. Markets understood that immediately. Brent crude surged past $97 per barrel in overnight trading, its sharpest single-session spike in over a year. West Texas Intermediate followed within hours. Emergency client notes from Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, and Morgan Stanley each warned of potential trajectories toward $120 to $150 per barrel if conflict escalates and Hormuz shipments face any disruption. The arithmetic for American consumers is direct and painful. Every $10 increase in crude oil prices adds approximately 25 cents to the cost of a gallon of gasoline. If oil reaches $130 per barrel from its pre-crisis level near $75, a scenario analysts are no longer treating as extreme. American families could face gasoline prices $1 or more higher than last month. But energy is not the only economic pressure point activated by this crisis. Shipping insurance rates for vessels transiting the Persian Gulf and Red Sea spiked sharply overnight. Global freight costs, already elevated following years of supply chain disruption, face renewed upward pressure. Food production and distribution costs, which are directly tied to energy input costs, rise alongside them. Central banks in the United States, Europe, and Asia that had only recently begun cutting interest rates after years of fighting post-pandemic inflation now face the nightmare scenario. A new inflationary shock arriving before the last one was fully resolved. For households in America, Europe, and across the developing world, this is not an abstract geopolitical story. It is a concrete, measurable threat to purchasing power, heating costs, grocery bills, and economic stability that took years of painful adjustment to partially restore. Every serious analyst monitoring this crisis is running two scenarios. Let's walk through both honestly. Israel conducts a powerful but precisely calibrated military response targeting Iranian military infrastructure, missile production facilities, IRGC command centers, possibly air defense systems that protect Iran's nuclear sites. The strike is significant enough to restore Israeli deterrence and demonstrate that direct attacks on Israeli soil carry severe consequences. Iran absorbs the response, issues statements about reserving the right to respond further, but ultimately does not launch another immediate strike. The United States applies intense diplomatic pressure on all parties. Gulf Arab states activate back-channel communications with Tehran. Oil markets stabilize at elevated levels. The crisis remains serious but does not metastasize into regional war. This scenario is possible. It is not guaranteed. Israel's response is broader and more damaging than Tehran anticipated. Striking targets Iran considers existential red lines, potentially including nuclear infrastructure. Iran responds not just with another missile salvo, but by activating its remaining proxy networks simultaneously. Hezbollah remnants in Lebanon, militia groups in Iraq targeting American bases, Houthi attacks on Gulf shipping. American military personnel sustain casualties. Washington faces immediate domestic political pressure to respond directly. The conflict expands from a bilateral Israel-Iran exchange into a multilateral regional war involving American forces, with consequences for global energy markets, NATO alliance dynamics, and the strategic calculations of both China and Russia. This scenario is not inevitable, but every intelligence assessment confirms it is no longer implausible. The next 72 hours will determine which scenario the world is living in. Watch for three specific indicators. First, the nature and scope of Israel's military response, particularly whether it targets Iranian territory directly or limits itself to proxy infrastructure. Second, whether American military assets in the region come under attack from Iran-aligned militia groups. Third, whether Chinese diplomatic channels produce any visible de-escalation signals from Tehran. If all three indicators move in the wrong direction simultaneously, the world will be in a crisis of a magnitude not seen since the Cold War's most dangerous moments. Here is what we know with certainty tonight. Iran launched a direct, large-scale ballistic missile strike against Israel. Multiple missiles struck Israeli territory. Global oil markets surged immediately with analysts warning of a potential crude shortage if the Strait of Hormuz is threatened. Israel has declared its intention to respond with force. American military assets in the region are on elevated alert, and the diplomatic architecture capable of managing this crisis is dangerously thin after years of collapsed agreements, missed opportunities, and hardened positions on every side. Here is what remains uncertain: the precise damage assessment from last night's strike, the full scope of Israel's planned response, Whether Iran's claim that the operation is concluded represents a genuine off-ramp or a strategic deception, and whether any actor in this crisis, Washington, Beijing, Riyadh, or anyone else, has both the leverage and the will to stop the next escalatory cycle before it begins. What is not uncertain is this. The Middle East crossed a line last night that changes the security calculus of the entire region. The rules of engagement between Iran and Israel have been rewritten in real time, and the consequences, military, economic, and human, are already moving through the global system with a speed and force that no government, no market, and no household anywhere in the world can fully insulate itself from. The story is not over. It is barely beginning, and Pinnacle News will be here every step of the way, bringing you the analysis, the intelligence, and the clarity you need to understand what is happening and why it matters. If this coverage has given you something the mainstream news cycle is missing, subscribe to Pinnacle News right now. Hit the notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what is unfolding, because in a crisis like this, being informed is not optional. It is essential. We will see you in the next update.